If you are listening at this moment, perhaps your mind has already traveled through a long day. Too many thoughts layered on top of one another. Too many sounds competing for attention, and too many questions left unanswered. We live in a world that constantly demands understanding, reaction, and control to the point that we sometimes forget what it feels like to simply be still. This video does not arrive to explain anything further. It arrives to invite you to rest. Tonight we will step into a very slow journey, not to search for final answers about the universe, but to observe how those questions echo within your own inner space. As everything around you begins to quiet, you may start to sense a different kind of openness, a place where thoughts no longer collide, where meaning is not forced to appear right away. The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. Perhaps the universe was never truly outside of us at all. Perhaps the feeling of being lost is simply another way the mind reminds us that we have forgotten to turn inward. So allow this voice to drift slowly. You do not need to remember anything. You do not need to keep up. Just listen and let the silence do the rest. There is a question that at first glance sounds almost absurd, yet it has quietly existed throughout the history of human thought for a very long time. A question that is not loud, that does not demand an immediate answer, but simply rests there like a small stone placed into still water. What would happen if our entire universe were inside a black hole? That question did not emerge from science fiction, nor was it born to overwhelm. It comes from a very different place from the humility of science when it reaches the limits of itself. From the moment humanity began to realize that the more we understand the universe, the more we must accept that there are things that cannot be seen from the outside. Perhaps we have never stood outside to observe the whole. Perhaps we have always been inside. In modern life, our minds are often pulled outward toward data, news, speed comparison, conclusion. Everything urges us to be faster, clearer, more certain. But the universe, if it could speak in a very quiet voice, does not seem to operate at that pace. It does not explain. It does not rush. It simply exists. And for that reason, posing a question like this is not meant to confuse you, but to allow the mind to slow down, to pause within a space that does not require an answer. The idea that the universe might resemble a black hole, or even exist inside one, has been seriously discussed in theoretical physics. Not as a belief, but as a possibility. A model. Another way of thinking about boundaries. The boundary of light. The boundary of information. The boundary of what can be observed. The event horizon of a black hole where everything enters and nothing returns sounds strikingly similar to the boundary of the observable universe, not because they are identical, but because both remind us of something deeply human. There are thresholds we cannot cross, only inhabit. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Perhaps these vast cosmological models are also distant mirrors reflecting how we face our own inner lives. We often believe that answers lie outside in more information, more light, more understanding. But the farther we go, the more we encounter limits that cannot be pierced. And then within that silence, another question begins to arise. If we cannot look outward, can we turn inward? Philosophy has long been familiar with questions that have no final resolution. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, reminded himself in a calm and steady voice, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." That line does not call for escape from the world. It merely suggests that there is another space deeper where chaos no longer holds absolute power. When we listen to hypotheses about the universe, about black holes, about boundaries that cannot be crossed, perhaps what matters is not whether they are true or false. What matters is the state of mind they invite, a state that knows how to pause, how to acknowledge limits, and how to remain still within what is not yet understood. Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. But perhaps in this context, the abyss need not be a terrifying void. It may simply be a deep space where familiar noise no longer echoes, a place where we are no longer forced to define ourselves by roles, achievements, or constant thought. A place where we can allow ourselves not to know and still be safe. When the question of the universe is told in a slow voice, it does not pull us away from sleep. On the contrary, it guides us back to something very ancient, the state of being human, looking up at the night sky without needing to understand everything in order to feel that we belong. Perhaps the universe was never outside us. Perhaps the feeling of being lost arises only when we try to step outside our own lived experience and analyze it too relentlessly. And so if tonight you are listening, you do not need to hold on to this hypothesis. You do not need to decide whether it is right or wrong. You only need to let it pass through the mind like a slow-moving cloud, like a gentle thought that demands no response. Just as the universe itself, if it truly is a black hole, does not require you to understand it in order to exist within it. Let the question remain, not as a burden, but as a distant lullaby. And as the mind gradually settles, you may notice this sometimes peace does not come from knowing where you are in the universe, but from allowing yourself to be still right here in this moment. After the first question has been set down like a small stone in the heart of the night, the question of whether the universe truly exists outside us, the current of thought does not stop. It continues to drift very slowly in another direction. No longer a purely abstract hypothesis within the human mind, but a trace drawn from observation itself, carried by the most ancient light we are able to see. When the James Webb Telescope began sending back its first images of distant galaxies, structures formed in the very early age of the universe, scientists did not see beauty alone. They sensed something slightly out of rhythm. Not loudly, not immediately, but enough to make those accustomed to randomness pause a little longer. Among these galaxies, their rotational motion did not appear evenly distributed as expected. Instead of a reassuring balance, half turning one way, half the other, the data suggested that roughly 2/3 seemed to rotate in the same direction. At first, hearing this may not sound striking, but in cosmology, where randomness is considered a foundational principle, such an imbalance is like an irregular heartbeat in a body long believed to be stable. If the universe has no preferred direction, if there is no before or after, no left or right on the largest scale, then why would such a tendency appear? Why would the motions of distant galaxy structures that have never communicated with one another seem so aligned? What makes this observation contemplative is not the number itself, but the feeling it evokes, a feeling deeply familiar to inner human life. When we believe everything within us is chaotic, only to suddenly notice repeating patterns. When we assume our thoughts are random, yet realize they often lean in a particular direction, toward anxiety, toward hope, toward fear, toward the desire to control. William James once wrote in The Principles of Psychology, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." At first glance, this line appears to speak only of the individual mind, but when extended outward, it also touches the way we observe the universe. We expect randomness because randomness feels safe, no favoritism, no predetermined path. But when data begins to whisper that a preferred direction might exist, our first response is not curiosity, but unease. For a universe with direction implies that we are not entirely free in the way we imagine it. Still, science does not rush to conclusions. These observations are placed within a quiet zone of debate. It could be a measurement bias. It could be a selection effect. It could be an illusion shaped by our own position within the Milky Way. Yet it is precisely this uncertainty that is worth listening to. It opens a space, one where the mind does not need to rush toward a side. Philosophy has long treated such spaces as the birthplace of depth. Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "The most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking. Not because humans lack the ability to think, but because we fill every gap too quickly." When cosmology encounters an anomaly like this, it is doing something rare in modern life, accepting a pause. Not to avoid the question, but to listen to what is being said not only through numbers, but through meaning. If the universe truly has a preferred direction, it does not necessarily mean it was designed. It may simply suggest that the beginning of everything was not perfectly symmetrical, that there is a faint trace of an initial motion, much like a small wave that continues to travel long after the stone has already sunk. And if this is true, then the way we find ourselves pulled towards certain inner tendencies, no matter how much we strive for randomness, suddenly becomes understandable. This line of thought does not ask you to remember the scientific details. It only invites you to stay with that sense of imbalance, a deeply human feeling. When we realize that not everything is perfectly balanced, yet that does not mean chaos. Sometimes imbalance itself creates rhythm, like a heart that does not beat with perfect regularity, like a breath that is never completely symmetrical. And as we carry this trace into the next part of the journey, the question of whether the universe was born already spinning, perhaps what matters is not discovering the correct direction. Perhaps it is allowing ourselves to recognize that both in the universe and in the mind, silence contains far more information than we expect. If you feel your eyelids growing heavy as you listen, it does not mean you are missing anything. It may mean you are touching the very state in which these questions are born. a state that does not require full alertness, only enough stillness to keep drifting. From the faint trace left by distant galaxies, the subtle irregularity in their rotation, the stream of thought cannot help but drift a little farther. Not toward affirmation, but toward possibility. A hypothesis that sounds almost too vast to grasp, yet is spoken in science with an unusually quiet voice. What if the universe was born already spinning? This idea is not meant to overwhelm. It does not arrive as a declaration. It simply stands there very still, much like the way deep questions tend to surface in the quietest moments of inner life. If the universe carried angular momentum from the very beginning, then the directional bias we observe today would no longer be an anomaly. It would merely be a distant echo of an original motion still unfolding so slowly that we have only just begun to notice it. In physics, nearly all black holes rotate. Not because they choose to, but because rotation is a natural consequence of collapse and the conservation of angular momentum. When matter contracts, motion does not disappear, it concentrates. And if the universe in some models can be viewed as a structure analogous to a black hole, then the idea that it carried motion from its origin no longer feels foreign. Black hole cosmology, a lesser-known but persistent theoretical branch, has long asked whether the Big Bang was truly a motionless beginning or merely a moment within a much larger chain of movement. What makes this hypothesis difficult to accept is not its complexity, but the way it unsettles a deeply held belief. We are accustomed to the idea that the universe on its largest scale is homogeneous and unbiased. No left, no right. No up, no down. A space in which all directions are equal, a universe that is fair in a geometric sense. But if a fundamental motion exists, then the universe is no longer entirely neutral. It carries a historical trace, a memory. And the notion of memory, strangely enough, is not unfamiliar to human inner life. We often believe that each day begins as a blank page, yet the longer we live, the more we realize that certain tendencies within us are not random at all. There are repeated reactions, familiar emotional leanings, thoughts that return again and again, as if the mind itself carries its own angular momentum formed very early from things we no longer clearly remember. Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "The human mind is part of the infinite intellect of God." If we replace the word God with nature, as he often implied, the line evokes a deeply peaceful image. The human mind does not stand apart from the motion of the universe. It is part of it. And if the universe has motion, then perhaps the feeling that we are constantly drawn along familiar inner trajectories is not a personal failure at all. It is simply a sign that we are moving within a larger current. If accepted, the hypothesis that the universe was born spinning would force many existing cosmological models to be rewritten. But within the space of this story, what matters is not the rewriting of equations. It is the rewriting of attitude, an attitude of humility. When science dares to say what we take as fundamental may only be a very small slice of reality. Nietzsche once wrote, "Inhuman, all too human convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies." This line is not aimed at science itself, but at premature certainty. When we cling too tightly to an image of the universe or of ourselves, we risk missing the subtle movements unfolding beneath the surface. A rotating universe is not a chaotic universe. It is simply a universe with history, with inertia, with things that did not begin from zero. And here the stream of thought begins to touch a very deep layer of healing. Much of modern human exhaustion comes from the belief that we must create everything from scratch, start over, reinvent, escape the past. But if even the universe carries motion from its birth, then carrying old traces within ourselves is no longer something to be ashamed of. It is simply a sign that we are continuing a journey that began long before us. When we listen to this hypothesis at night in a slow and gentle voice, it does not push us toward the future. It draws us closer to a place where we can allow ourselves not to rebuild entirely, not to be still in order to be called balanced. Perhaps balance is not found in the absence of rotation, but in rotating slowly enough not to be swept away. And so from the idea of a universe born spinning, the current of thought does not end with motion. It carries us softly toward the next question, the question of boundaries. If the universe has motion, if it carries angular momentum like a black hole, then might the universe itself exist within a larger structure? Not to answer yet, only to keep drifting. And if along the way your breath slows, your eyelids grow heavy, that is entirely fitting. These questions were never meant to keep us awake. They were born to remind us that being still within motion is also a form of peace. When the hypothesis of a universe born already spinning is set down like a quiet, underlying motion that continues on its own, the stream of thought naturally drifts toward an even deeper question. No longer how the universe moves, but where the universe is. Where in the most primordial sense. Not coordinates, not maps, but the existential position of everything we can see, measure, and name as reality. And it is here that an idea both simple and unsettling emerges. What if our universe exists inside a black hole? To approach this question, we do not need equations or diagrams, only a very slow image. A black hole, in its simplest understanding, is not a hole that devours everything in the universe. It is a region of space with a very precise boundary, the event horizon. Once that boundary is crossed, no signal can return. No light, no information, no message, no trace. Not because there is a physical wall, but because the structure of space-time itself no longer allows a way back. Our universe has a remarkably similar boundary, the observable universe. Not a boundary of existence, but a boundary of visibility. Light takes time to travel, and the universe has a finite age. This means there are regions whose light has never had time to reach us, not because they do not exist, but because no informational path connects them to us. These two boundaries, the event horizon of a black hole and the observational horizon of the universe, are not physically identical, yet they are alike in the experience. They create an experience of limitation. Not a limitation born of ignorance, but one rooted in the very structure of reality. We do not see beyond, not because we are insufficiently intelligent, but because we cannot. If listened to slowly enough, this carries a strangely gentle consolation. Much of the exhaustion in human inner life comes from believing that we must see everything, understand the whole picture, stand outside in order to judge. But perhaps there was never such an outside to stand upon. Perhaps we have always been inside not only the universe, but the experience of living itself. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." This sentence is often read as a statement about language. But in the quiet space of tonight, it can be heard as a very gentle reminder. Every world has boundaries, and those boundaries are not failures. They are simply the conditions that allow a world to exist as something that can be lived. If the universe truly resides inside a black hole, then our inability to see beyond it is no longer a shortcoming. It becomes a feature, a part of the structure itself, like a fetus unable to see beyond the womb. Not because it is unready, but because that environment is designed for nourishment, not observation. This comparison is not meant to assert anything, only to evoke a feeling. Being inside does not mean being trapped. Philosophy has long been familiar with living within unbreachable boundaries. Kant called them the limits of reason. Buddhism calls it ignorance, not in a negative sense, but as an acceptance that some things cannot be known through analytical thought. And within that acceptance, a very deep form of peace arises. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together." If we replace fate with the structure of the universe, the line suddenly feels perfectly at home here. Accepting that we exist within a structure we cannot escape does not diminish us. It simply allows us to stop exhausting ourselves on impossible efforts. From the outside, a black hole appears as absolute darkness. But if we imagine ourselves inside a purely hypothetical thought, there is no moment labeled crossing the horizon. Everything continues. No shock, no warning, no marked transition. This mirrors the way we live our own lives. There is no moment that announces we have gone too far into a belief, a relationship, an identity. We only realize it afterward, and perhaps for this reason, the idea of a universe inside a black hole should not be heard with tension. It should be heard as an invitation to loosen our grip, to release the need to escape, to let go of the desire to stand outside and understand everything, to abandon the illusion that there exists an absolute perspective untouched by the observer's position. Alan Watts once said in a lecture, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." If this is so, then our inability to look beyond the universe is no longer a problem. For the universe never needed to be seen from the outside in order to exist. It is being lived, felt, and experienced through the very small presence of each individual. And so from the question of whether the universe was born, spinning the current of thought leads us to a quieter realization. Perhaps we have never stood at the edge observing the universe. We have always been inside it, just as we are always inside our own minds. No escape route, but no prison either. Only a space wide enough to breathe, deep enough to remain. When this stream of thought settles, it does not end with a conclusion. it leaves behind only a feeling that not seeing beyond is not a loss. It may be the very condition that allows us to learn how to stay gently slowly within the moment that is passing. And if, as this happens, sleep finds you, then perhaps you are exactly where these questions were always meant to belong. When the idea of a universe existing inside a black hole is gently set down not as a conclusion, but as a possibility, the stream of thought does not end there. It opens another door deeper and quieter. If our universe could exist inside a black hole, then what is happening inside the black holes of this very universe? That question leads us to an ancient image, one that appeared in Indian philosophy and has been passed down as a parable. It's turtles all the way down. A turtle carrying the world on its back. That turtle standing on another turtle. And beneath it, yet another. No clear ending. No final foundation. Only a chain of support extending endlessly downward. In the language of modern science, this image is retold in a new voice: nested universes. If each black hole can be a child universe, then each universe may give rise to new black holes, and within them further universes continue to form, not as an engineering diagram, but as an open story. A story that does not ask you to believe, only to remain with the feeling. It evokes the sense that reality may be deeper than any layer of understanding we have ever reached. What is striking is that this idea is not new at all. It has simply been spoken in different languages. In philosophy, it appears as the question of the ultimate ground of existence. In depth psychology, it emerges as layers of the unconscious beneath consciousness. And in inner life, it appears in the simplest way as the feeling that every time we think we have hit bottom, another layer quietly opens beneath us. Carl Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The unconscious is not a demonic monster, but a natural entity." Heard at night, this line does not sound like a warning. It sounds like reassurance. The deeper layers are not there to threaten us, but to support us. Just like the image of nested universe is not meant to overwhelm, but to remind us that meaning does not require a clearly defined endpoint. When we ask how far this chain extends, we are not asking only a physical question. We are asking a deeply human one. How many layers within us are real? How many levels of experience make up what we call I, and is there a core self, pure and untouched by anything above it? David Hume wrote in a treatise of human nature, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." Hume could not find a fixed self, only a succession of experiences. Much like how we cannot locate a single definitive root universe within a chain of nested ones. Each layer is real, yet none claims to be final. And perhaps it is precisely this absence of an ultimate bottom that brings a gentle relief, the feeling that we do not need to reach the deepest point in order to rest. In modern life, we are often obsessed with finding ultimate causes. Why am I like this? Why is the world this way? Why did this happen? But if the universe has no single foundational origin, then searching for a final explanation of ourselves may also be unnecessary. Not because it is wrong, but because it is not required for peace. Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "The more we understand individual things, the more we understand God." Yet understanding here does not have to mean analyzing all the way down. It can simply mean acknowledging that each layer has its own value without needing to be reduced to a center. A universe inside a black hole is still a universe. A shallow emotion is still a real emotion. A passing thought is still part of lived experience. When we hear about nested universes at night in a slow and gentle voice, the idea does not make us want to escape. It allows us to loosen our grip, for if there is no bottom, then there is nowhere to fall. Only different layers of being. And we are already on the layer we need to be on right now. From here, the stream of thought flows naturally toward another question. If there is no clearly defined root universe, if everything arises from a continuing chain of becoming, then was the Big Bang truly an absolute beginning, or was it simply a doorway between two deeper layers of reality? That question does not need an immediate answer. It only needs to be set down very gently, like another small stone in still water, to let the ripples spread slowly. And if in that moment you feel no further need to understand, no urge to go deeper, that does not mean you are missing anything. Perhaps you are touching the true spirit of this story, being allowed to stop within a bottomless reality and still feel safe. Let the turtles continue to carry one another somewhere far away, and here you may simply breathe a little more slowly. For sometimes the most healing realization does not come from finding the ultimate foundation of the universe, but from recognizing that you do not need to stand on any absolute ground in order to rest through the night. From the image of nested universes like turtles carrying turtles in a story without a bottom, the stream of thought continues to drift very slowly toward a point humans have long called the beginning, the Big Bang. Two words that sound like an explosion, an absolute moment, a zero point from which everything emerged out of nothing. And yet if we listen long enough, quietly enough, another question begins to surface, not loudly, but gently. What if the Big Bang was not the beginning? In some modern physical models, especially those connected to black holes and quantum gravity, the Big Bang is no longer seen as a moment of creation, but as a bounce, a reversal. Before it, there was not emptiness, but collapse, matter contracting, density increasing, time slowing down. And then instead of falling into a meaningless singularity, everything rebounds, expands like a deep breath taken after holding one for far too long. Stripped of equations, this image feels remarkably close to human experience. We often believe we are starting over, a new decision, a new phase, a personal Big Bang. But when we look more closely, we rarely begin from nothing. We rise from what has contracted, from heavy periods, from moments of collapse we once thought had reached the bottom. The traditional Big Bang tells a clean story from a hot, dense, uniform state. The universe expands, cools, and forms all structure. It is elegant, coherent, and reassuring, a story that allows us to feel we understand where everything came from. But the bounce model tells a different story. It does not reject the Big Bang. It places it in the middle, between a before and an after, between contraction and expansion, between two beats of the same motion. What makes this model deeply contemplative is not only its scientific grounding, but its strange resonance with another cosmological phenomenon, cosmic inflation. Shortly after the Big Bang, the universe is thought to have expanded at an extraordinary rate for a very brief moment, as if it needed to escape itself. That rapid expansion helps explain why the universe today appears so flat, so uniform, so consistent. A powerful rebound followed by widening openness. It sounds remarkably like the way the human mind responds after crisis. A deep stillness, then a phase of opening where everything seems to spread out, soften, loosen, at least for a while. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." If we replace chaos with collapse, the weight of the sentence remains unchanged. No rebound exists without contraction. No birth occurs without carrying the trace of what once fell apart. And if the Big Bang was a bounce, then our universe was not born from nothingness, but from continuation, a breath within a much longer rhythm of breathing. Heard at night, this idea does not seek to dismantle belief. It soothes it, because it allows us to look back at the beginnings of our own lives differently. Perhaps the moments we thought were total failures were only periods of contraction. Perhaps not being ready to open is not a sign of ending, but preparation for a rebound. Eastern philosophy has long been familiar with this rhythm. Birth and death are not separate. Opening and closing are not opposites. Every beginning already carries the seed of its ending, and every ending contains the possibility of another beginning. In this moment, science seems to be touching the same intuition spoken in another language. If the Big Bang was not an absolute beginning, then our obsession with finding a definitive starting point can soften. We do not need to know where everything began in order to live fully in this moment. The universe does not require us to understand its entire history to exist within it. And life does not require us to explain every cause in order to rest. As this stream of thought passes through your mind, allow it to do what it does best, not conclude. It does not come to replace the Big Bang with another story. It comes only to soften our ideas of beginnings and endings, to remind us that perhaps things do not begin and end in the ways we once believed. And from here, the current leads toward an even lighter question. If the Big Bang was only a bounce, if it was the result of a larger structure like a black hole, then might there be connections between universes, pathways that cannot be crossed yet still exist like the memory of an earlier motion? You do not need to follow that question right now. You only need to let your breath slow a little, because sometimes understanding that there is no absolute beginning is enough to let the mind rest, not because we know more, but because we no longer need to begin again from nothing. As the idea of the Big Bang as a rebound gradually settles like a breath finally released after a long compression, the stream of thought drifts toward another image, One familiar from science fiction, yet in this context rendered quieter and far more intimate: the wormhole. Not as a gateway for adventure, but as a trace of connection, something that exists yet cannot be crossed. In cosmological models where black holes give rise to child universes, each of those universes is not entirely separate. It remains connected to its parent universe by the very structure that brought it into being. A real connection, but one that does not allow passage. No ships, no signals, no greetings from the other side. Only the silent presence of a link we know exists, yet can never reach. Heard slowly enough, this carries a deeply human resonance. In our inner lives, we often carry such connections as well. To the past, to people who once passed through our lives, to earlier versions of ourselves. We know there is a thread that binds us, but there is no road back. Not because we did not try hard enough, but because the structure of experience itself does not permit return. In physics, wormholes are not the convenient tunnels of cinema. They are fragile mathematical solutions requiring extreme conditions to exist, and they are often unstable. Yet, it is precisely this fragility that makes them feel less fantastical. They do not promise travel. They merely say that some connections exist without producing movement. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "In being and time, every kind of being in the world is grounded in temporality. Every mode of existence is anchored in time, and time, as we experience it, moves in one direction. We go forward, not back. Any wormholes that might exist would have to obey this asymmetry. They remind us that connection does not imply return, and that this does not make the connection any less real. In this light, the idea of the wormhole becomes gentle. It is no longer a symbol of escape, but a symbol of unusable connection, a form of relation that does not serve a purpose. It simply exists, like memory, like dreams, like the fleeting sense of familiarity that arises when an old melody drifts through the night. If each child universe is linked to its parent through such a structure, then our own universe also carries a sign of its origin, not as a path back, but as a reminder that we did not arise from nothing. No journey is required to prove this. It is enough to know that a connection exists beyond our capacity to intervene. Carl Jung once wrote, "In memories, dreams, reflections, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This line is often heard as an affirmation of freedom. But in the light of this story, it can also be heard as acceptance. We cannot return to alter our origins. We cannot pass through the wormhole of the past. But we can remain with the present, knowing that the connection does not vanish simply because it cannot be touched. What makes wormholes less fantastical is not their promise of travel, but their limitation. Modern science grows increasingly cautious of ideas that offer too much. And in that caution, a rare kind of beauty appears, the beauty of structures that are real, yet do not serve human desire. They do not open. They do not respond. They simply are. Perhaps this is also the gentle lesson these ideas offer to the tired modern mind. Not every connection needs to be used. Not every door needs to be opened. Not every question requires a path leading to an answer. Sometimes knowing that a thread exists is enough to soften the feeling of isolation. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Everything is interwoven, and the web is holy." That interweaving does not always allow us to move from one point to another. It simply reminds us that nothing exists in complete isolation. Even when we cannot send a signal, cannot return, cannot cross over. The connection remains like a very low underlying hum, just strong enough to support a sense of belonging. And from here, the current of thought continues naturally. If universes are linked by connections that cannot be crossed, if every large structure carries the trace of another, then what happens when those structures end? When black holes evaporate? When connections fade? When the entire chain of support begins to dissolve? You do not need to answer that question right now. You only need to notice that even within connections that cannot be traversed, there is a deep kind of comfort. That some threads do not ask for action, only for acknowledgement. And if as you listen, you feel no desire to go anywhere, not through space, not through wormholes, not in search of answers that is entirely fitting, these stories are not told to take you elsewhere. They are told to help you remain gently and quietly within the moment that is passing. As the stream of thought about connections that cannot be crossed gradually settles like a string, still faintly vibrating after the hand has let go, another question begins to emerge, not loudly, but deeply enough to make us pause. If the universe is so vast, if time has flowed for so long, then where is everyone? This is the central question of the Fermi Paradox, a question that is not theatrical but disarmingly simple. With hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars and countless planets, the emergence of intelligent life should not be exceedingly rare. And if there were civilizations that preceded us by millions or even billions of years, traces of their existence should be everywhere. Yet the night sky remains silent. No signals, no greetings, no clear signs of anyone else but us. In the quiet space of night, that silence is not frightening. It is simply empty. And within that emptiness, a bold hypothesis is whispered. What if advanced civilizations do not disappear, but instead leave? Not leave in the sense of traveling between stars, but leave this universe itself. If black holes can indeed give birth to child universes, if the structure of reality allows for a new form of cosmic residency, then the idea of a super-advanced civilization creating artificial black holes no longer belongs entirely to science fiction. Not as an act of destruction, but as a way of creating new living space, a private universe where conditions can be more carefully controlled, more stable, more enduring. Told slowly, this idea carries no sense of invasion. It carries a sense of withdrawal, like the way a person sometimes chooses to leave a city that has grown too loud, seeking a quieter place. Not out of rejection, but out of the need for a different space in which to continue existing. If such civilizations have mastered energy, matter, and time to an extraordinary degree, then choosing not to remain may not be a failure, but a decision. And if they have left, then the silence of the universe is no longer an alarming mystery. It becomes a sign that those who came before us chose a path we cannot yet see. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." This line is often read in the context of absurdity and revolt, but seen through the lens of the Fermi Paradox, it can also be heard as a reminder perhaps not every civilization chooses to continue the struggle within the same arena. Perhaps some choose to step away from the game not because they surrender, but because they have found another mode of existence, one in which struggle is no longer necessary in the old way. An even quieter possibility emerges. They did not leave at all, but remained inside private universes. No need to expand, no need to colonize, no need to send signals outward. A sufficiently advanced civilization may no longer need to be seen, no longer need recognition, no longer need to leave traces. They exist within a closed, self-sustaining space where the problems we still wrestle with were resolved long ago. Heard through the ear of philosophy, this carries a familiar tone. Many traditions of thought have long suggested that maturity does not mean expanding outward, but turning inward, reducing the need to intervene, reducing the need to assert, reducing the need to be known. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." If we replace thoughts with choices, the line suddenly fits this hypothesis remarkably well. A sufficiently deep civilization may choose to change the way it exists rather than attempting to change the entire universe around it. And when we revisit the Fermi Paradox from this perspective, the question, why don't we see anyone, no longer feels lonely. It becomes a gentler question, perhaps. Silence is a sign of maturity. Perhaps those who have gone far enough no longer leave loud traces behind. They do not broadcast signals. They do not build monumental structures meant to be noticed. They simply remain still within a space that suits them. For modern humans constantly surrounded by noise, this idea is unexpectedly healing. It suggests that evolution does not have to mean becoming louder, bigger, more visible. Perhaps one sign of true development is the ability to disappear from unnecessary noise. From here, the stream of thought flows onward into an even deeper question. If civilizations can create their own universes, if they can choose the conditions of their existence, then what determines that our universe has physical constants that are just right for life? Is this random, or is it the result of a larger structure where many universes are born under similar rules? You do not need to pursue that question now. You only need to remain with the very light feeling this hypothesis leaves behind. That the silence of the universe is not necessarily abandonment. It may be a form of respect for distance. And if as you listen you feel less need to search for others out there, less need for proof that you are not alone, that is perfectly fitting. Because sometimes the deepest comfort does not come from knowing that someone is watching us from afar, but from realizing this silence itself can be a very high form of existence. And within that silence, sleep may arrive naturally like an answer that never needs to be spoken. After the idea of civilizations retreating into their own private universes gradually dissolves into silence, the stream of thought drifts toward a question that feels more familiar yet also deeper and quieter. A question that has haunted both science and philosophy for decades. Why is this universe so precisely just right for life? The physical constants, gravity, electromagnetism, the rate of expansion, the ratios among the fundamental interactions appear to be set at extraordinarily delicate values. Change them even slightly, and stars would never form atoms, would not remain stable. Complex chemistry would fail to emerge. Not optimal, not perfect, but sufficient. Sufficient for matter to connect, sufficient for time to endure, sufficient for life in a fragile way to arise. In inner life, this sense of just enough feels deeply familiar. We rarely live under ideal conditions, but sometimes being safe enough, quiet enough, having enough space to breathe is already enough to go on. And so when humans look at the universe and see that it is just enough, the response is not only scientific curiosity, but an existential tremor, as if something had been arranged or at least filtered. One common explanation is the multiverse, countless universes, each with different constants, and we simply exist in the rare one that allows life. But within the context of this story, where black holes give birth to universes, where universes are nested within one another, another possibility quietly appears. If every black hole produces similar universes, then the life-friendly conditions of our universe are no longer exceptional. They are simply one rhythm within a long sequence of similar rhythms. If this is so, then fine-tuning is no longer a deliberate choice but a structural consequence. Much like an apple tree does not choose to produce apples, it merely does what its structure allows. And if all universes born from black holes carry closely related laws, then life may emerge in many places, not because it is favored, but because the underlying conditions are already prepared. Yet there is another possibility quieter still and more unsettling. If super-advanced civilizations can create artificial black holes, if they can generate child universes with controlled parameters, then the question, why is this universe just right, can be heard in a different way. Not as evidence of religious design, but as a distant trace of technical intention, not for worship, but for long-term survival. Told slowly, this idea carries no sense of threat. It does not say that we are products. It merely raises the possibility that our universe is not purely random. And if that is so, it does not make life less meaningful. It softens the question of meaning. Because if we are not the center, then we are also not burdened with the weight of ultimate purpose. Baruch Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "Nature does not act with an end in view. Nature does not act for a purpose. And if our universe arose as a consequence of other structures, then it does not need an intention in order to be livable. It only needs to exist as it exists. And life, as a fragile consequence, finds its own way within it." What makes the fine-tuning problem healing when heard at night is not the answer, but the release from the need to be special. Much of human pressure comes from believing that we must have a unique role, a grand mission, a cosmic justification for our existence. But if life arises because conditions are merely just enough, then our being here requires no magnificent defense at all. Albert Einstein once said, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." This does not claim that the universe was designed for us. It simply notes that we can understand part of it, and perhaps our ability to live within it is similar, not because it was made for us, but because we happen to fit. When we ask whether our universe might be artificial, what matters is not answering yes or no. What matters is recognizing that whatever the answer may be, lived experience still unfolds in this moment, this breath, this body, this night. The universe does not need to be purely random or perfectly designed in order to allow us to rest. And from here, the current of thought begins to slow. After passing through possibilities of structure and tension and deep layers of reality, a very gentle doubt emerges. What if all these clues are illusions? What if the very way we observe creates the patterns we believe to be real? You do not need to pursue that question now. You only need to feel the relief of realizing this. Whether the universe is fine-tuned or not, you do not have to carry that answer through the night. Perhaps what is most sufficient for this sleep is simply the acknowledgement that existing within a universe that is just enough is itself enough. After passing through vast possibilities, from nested universes to civilizations retreating into private spaces, to the idea that physical constants are delicately fine-tuned, the stream of thought begins to slow. Not because a final answer has been reached, but because a very gentle doubt appears. A doubt that does not shatter, but softens everything around it. What if all of this is an illusion? Not illusion in a fanciful or reality-denying sense, but in a deeply scientific and deeply human one. The way we observe may itself have created the patterns we believe to be real. Light takes time to reach us. Data always passes through instruments. Instruments pass through interpretation. And at every step, there can be small deviations, subtle enough to go unnoticed at first, yet large enough to gradually shape the whole picture. In science, this is not something shameful. It is part of the process. Observational biases, analytical assumptions, early frameworks that quietly become defaults, all of these can lead us toward conclusions that sound convincing yet may not fully reflect reality. And when new data appears small, inconsistencies begin to surface like creases on a map that has been folded for too long. If the clues about galactic rotation, cosmic structure, or anomalous expansion are in fact consequences of how we look, then the implications are profound. Distances may need recalculating. The ages of galaxies may not be what we once believed, and the tensions within cosmology, the conflicts between measurements, may not signal a strange reality, but simply remind us that the map is never the territory. That phrase, familiar in epistemological philosophy, is not meant to diminish science. It only reminds us that all knowledge comes with a point of view, and every point of view has limits. Immanuel Kant once wrote in Critique of Pure Reason, "We have no knowledge of things as they are in themselves, but only as they appear to us." Heard at night, this does not create anxiety, it creates breathing room. For if reality always passes through our way of seeing, then not understanding everything is no longer a personal or scientific failure. It is simply a natural condition of being human. And science, in its deepest beauty, does not promise absolute certainty. It promises the capacity for self-correction. What matters is this science is still testing. None of the hypotheses we have encountered are placed upon a throne. All of them remain in waiting. Waiting for more data, waiting for more light, waiting for more time. And within that waiting, a quality rare in modern life quietly appears: patience with what is not yet clear. Philosophy has long regarded such patience as a form of wisdom. Socrates is remembered not for his answers, but for his admission, "I know that I know nothing." A confession that does not weaken knowledge, but humanizes it. And when we bring this attitude into cosmology, grand hypotheses no longer feel burdensome. They become open stories, possibly true, possibly false, yet all worthy of being heard. In inner life, this carries a deeply healing power. Much of human exhaustion comes from believing we must hold a complete picture of the world, of ourselves, of the future. But if even the universe, with all of humanity's data and intelligence, is still understood provisionally, then living with unaligned pieces no longer feels alarming. Perhaps the patterns we see in our own lives, recurring stories, seemingly fixed fates, are also products of how we observe ourselves. And like science, the mind too can recalibrate if we give it enough time and enough quiet. When the idea that everything may be an illusion is spoken in a slow voice, it does not dismantle belief. It simply loosens its rigidity. It says you do not need to cling tightly to any model of the universe or of yourself in order to be safe. Safety does not come from absolute certainty. It comes from the ability to release gently when needed. From here, the stream of thought begins to turn toward the final part of the journey. After all the hypotheses, structures, possibilities, and doubts, a very quiet question appears. No longer about how the universe works, but about what happens when everything fades. When black holes evaporate, when large structures slowly dissolve. You do not need to follow that question now. Perhaps the most important thing this part offers is a very light feeling you do not need to know anything for certain in order to rest. Science continues to test. Reality remains open. And within that openness, you may allow yourself to pause, breathe more slowly, and let sleep arrive not as an escape, but as a gentle way of living alongside the unknown. After passing through vast possibilities and even the gentlest of doubts, the stream of thought now slows naturally, as if it too knows that this is not the moment to go any farther. Not because ideas have been exhausted, but because it has reached the final question, a question that no longer invites analysis, but invites silence. What happens when a black hole evaporates? In physics, the idea sounds deceptively simple. Black holes do not last forever. Over spans of time so long they are difficult to imagine, they gradually lose energy, emit faint radiation, and eventually fade away. No explosion, no dramatic instant, only a slow dimming like embers cooling in the night. And if we accept the hypothesis that our universe might exist inside a black hole, then an unavoidable question arises very softly yet very deeply. Does the universe die? This question carries no panic. It does not ask about an apocalypse. It asks only about impermanence. Whether everything that now exists, space-time, memory, life, even this moment of listening is merely a phase within a process far larger than itself. And if that is so, what does it mean, if it means anything at all? Here, the image of turtles carrying turtles-nested universes begins to blur. If each black hole gives birth to a universe, and each black hole eventually evaporates, then the chain of support does not extend infinitely. Each turtle, each layer of reality may quietly dissolve. No witnesses, no record, no place where the story is kept. And it is precisely here that a deeply human feeling appears. Not fear, but a soft sorrow. A sorrow that does not need a name. For in our own lives, we are familiar with such dissolving. Relationships that were once very real. Phases that felt as though they would last forever. Versions of ourselves we once lived with and then slowly outgrew. There is no clear ceremony of ending. They simply fade. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "In being and time being toward death is essentially anxiety." But heard at night in a very slow voice, anxiety here does not have to mean panic. It can mean a gentle awareness of finitude. A recognition that all presence is fragile, and for that very reason worthy of being lived, not explained. If the universe truly can die, that does not render its existence meaningless. It simply makes it temporary. And temporariness is not a negative condition. In Buddhism, impermanence is not a curse. It is the condition that prevents anything from being trapped in suffering forever. Perhaps even the universe itself is not required to exist eternally in a single form. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." If the universe has a struggle of its own, perhaps it is not a struggle to exist forever, but a struggle to be experienced. And if it fades, that does not negate what once unfolded within it, just as the end of a day does not make its daylight meaningless. What matters here is this: in this part, we do not answer. We do not try to save the universe. We do not try to extend the chain of turtles by one more layer. We do not search for an eternal foundation to cling to, because all such efforts, deeply human as they are, may pull us away from the most important gift this question offers: the ability to let go. When we allow ourselves to imagine that even the largest structures can dissolve, a profound pressure is lifted from our shoulders. The pressure to leave a mark, to make something last, to exist in a way that will be remembered forever. But if nothing lasts forever, then being fully present in this moment is already enough. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. This line is not a threat, it is a release. It reminds us that we do not need to live as though everything must be extended indefinitely. We only need to live in harmony with the rhythm of impermanence. And perhaps that is what the question of evaporating black holes is quietly whispering. Not that everything will disappear and therefore nothing matters, but that because everything can disappear, gentleness, attention, and presence become infinitely more precious. As this stream of thought passes through your mind, it asks nothing specific of you. You do not need to feel sad. You do not need to feel afraid. You do not need to find meaning. You only need to notice that even if the last turtles dissolve, even if no foundation remains beneath us, this moment is still happening. This breath, this warmth, this weariness slowly softening. And from here, there are no more questions to open, only a wide silence, wide enough that you need not carry any thought with you, deep enough that everything may settle without conclusion. If sleep arrives now, it is not an escape from the final question. It is a gentle way of accepting that not everything needs an answer in order to be at peace. And now, as this journey gently comes to a close, not with an answer, but with a pause, you no longer need to carry anything with you. There is no need to remember the concepts you passed through. No need to hold on to the hypotheses that briefly crossed your mind. Everything has already fulfilled its role, not to be remembered, but to lead you here to a place quiet enough that thinking no longer feels necessary. In everyday life, we are used to holding on to meaning, holding on to answers, holding on to the feeling that we understand something so that we can feel secure. But tonight, you are allowed to do the opposite. You are allowed to set things down, like placing a heavy bag on the floor after a long day, like releasing a question that has not yet found its answer without feeling that anything is missing. The stories about the universe, about black holes, about vast structures and distant endings do not ask you to understand them fully in order to rest within them. The universe has never demanded complete understanding as a condition for existence. It simply exists. And within that existence, there is room for tired minds, scattered thoughts and emotions that have not yet found a name. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensées, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me, but perhaps when heard at night that silence is no longer frightening. It is simply vast, vast enough that nothing needs to intrude upon it, vast enough that our small worries no longer have to strain to hold themselves together, vast enough that we can rest within it without being threatened by infinity. If at any point during this journey you felt small, that is entirely natural. But small does not have to mean fragile in a negative sense. Small can also mean safe, like a child sleeping peacefully in a dark room without needing to know the structure of the house to feel protected. Like a drop of water in the ocean not needing to understand the entire ocean in order to be carried by it. There is a deep relief in realizing that you are not the center of every question, not the one who must carry all meaning, not the place where every answer must converge. When you allow yourself not to be at the center, an open space appears, and within that space, the body begins to soften. The breath slows, and the mind stops trying to control. Lao Tzu once wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "To know that you do not know is the best." Not knowing in this context is not a lack, it is a state that allows everything to be what it is without forcing it into a clear shape. And sleep, after all, is also a very gentle form of not knowing, where consciousness steps back for a while, allowing the deeper part of you to rest. You do not need to hold on to any images. You do not need to follow the thread of thought any further. If a thought still lingers, you do not need to push it away. You can let it drift past like a thin cloud crossing the night sky. No grasping, no resistance, just letting it dissolve on its own. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, in Meditations, nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. Perhaps the quietest place is not found in the final answers of cosmology, but in the moment you allow yourself to stop searching, to stop fitting the pieces together, to stop asking whether you have understood enough. Right now, you do not need to understand anything more in order to rest. Let your body grow heavier. Let your breath find its familiar steady rhythm again. No adjustment needed, no effort required. Simply allow everything to unfold in its own way. If sleep comes quickly, that does not mean you have missed anything. It is a sign that the mind has received what it needed permission to let go. And if sleep does not arrive right away, that is perfectly fine as well. There is no goal to reach, no deadline to meet. You are simply here within a universe that has no complete answer, and that does not make you less safe. On the contrary, it may be what allows you to be yourself without needing to be perfect, without needing to be certain. As this voice gradually fades, you do not need to carry it into your dreams. You can leave it behind like a path that has been walked far enough. The rest of the night needs no guidance. It knows how to complete itself. And in this quiet space, there is no conclusion offered, no final punctuation, only a very gentle peace opening up wide enough for you to rest deep enough that you no longer need to ask anything at all.